Throughout my life, I've always considered myself somewhat of a casual enjoyer of rock music. Back then, occasionally you'd find me blasting some My Chemical Romance and Day 6, but that would be about it until around last year when I started what I like to call the real music journey. Since March of last year, I consistently, at the bare minimum, listen to about 2 to 3 albums a day, and since I started this journey a year ago of trying to discover new music and artists I'd never checked out before, I've actually listened to 327 albums. And over this time, I've been introduced to a lot of new music, but I've also enhanced my knowledge of the genres and artists I already listen to. And I think the biggest one for me was rock and the many subgenres that surround it. And if I were to pick a band that I discovered through this new obsession with gaining more musical knowledge that really sold me on rock music and made it my most listened to genre, I'd have to say, without a doubt, it would have to be the legendary South Korean alternative rock band As I explained in the intro, THORNAPPLE are a South Korean quartet alternative rock band that formed in December of 2009 following their first performance at a small bar in Hongdae called Saloon Badabi, where a ton of Korean indie bands and artists would go to perform and sell their music.
저는 바다비 살롱 바다비를 운영하고 있고요. 일단은 죽겠다는 생각을 안 하게 됐죠. 그러니까 이거 처음에 할 때만 해도 죽겠다는 생각이 많아갖고 시를 써도 되게 정말 처참한 쓰고 그래서 무대에서 이렇게 혼자 잘 때도 이렇게 술을 많이 안 마시면은 악몽을 꾸고 되게 더러운 꿈 꾸고 잠을 못 자고 했는데 이거 하면서 많이 좋아졌어요.
If you're interested, there are a lot of videos of THORNAPPLE performing at Badabi that are really great, with the last one being in 2015, a little bit before the club shut down the same year. Either way, a couple months later, in July of 2010, they would release their debut album, I Often Stammer and Forget the Way to Sleep, and gain a decent amount of popularity among the niche audience of people that listen to Korean rock music. It was so popular that the album actually sold out solely through word of mouth. But while this was happening, THORNAPPLE weren't able to bask in their glory, performing awkwardly with really bad cuts and terrible fashion sense, or promoting their album. Instead, they would have to go on a 2-year hiatus as the members served their mandatory military service. But soon enough, THORNAPPLE were back, and on the 29th of January 2013, they released a remastered version of I Often Stammer and Forget the Way to Sleep, and would even release their sophomore album only a year later in 2014. But I'll talk about that in my next video. For now, let's actually talk about the album. I Often Stammer and Forget the Way to Sleep is THORNAPPLE at their most amateur, least technical, and experimental, which in some ways I understand how that could lead to it being seen as less than and overshadowed by their later work, but in my opinion, if you don't start comparing, this album does stand on its own as a really enjoyable experience. This project is stacked with tons of catchy melodies, poetically emotional songwriting, and powerful vocal performances from the band's singer, Yoon Sung-hyun. And I feel like out of those three qualities I just mentioned, one of the most important for me, and what really sells the album, is Yoon's voice. In all honesty, Yoon Sung-hyun is my favorite vocalist of all time. His ability to change the tone and flow of these songs solely through his voice is just so extremely impressive. He's a singer that I'd like to say has a lot of vocal control and can go from these extremely soft and somber performances to being really expressive and abrasive in his vocal delivery. And especially with how much simpler these songs can be, he does what every talented singer should do and takes these songs to the next level.
흔들흔들 매달린 채 허공 위를 달리고 있네요. 숨이 차고 해가 다 들어가도 난 앞으로 갈 수 없네요. 발을 기네.
Also, his vocals aren't only impressive when they're being recorded professionally, but also during live performances. Whether he's doing a concert, busking, or performing at clubs, Yoon always gives his all vocally. I also think he just has a really unique voice that I've never really heard before in rock music or really anywhere. In a way, even though I can't put my finger on it perfectly, his style of singing is very Korean, with how expressive and emotional he can get. In some ways, I feel like could be inspired by the many ballads that are extremely prevalent and famous in Korean music, and their very over-the-top performances that hit new levels of melodrama.
내 손끝에 남을 너의 향기 흩어져요.
And if I had to pick a song from the album that perfectly shows this, I'd have to say the fourth track, Gills, which, I'm gonna be real with you, is kind of an emo banger and is a song that really resonates with me. His vocals on this track are nothing short of amazing. He sings with so much emotion and really, like I said before, goes over the top with his performance, but in a way that actually works and doesn't hit that point where it feels like he's overdoing it. Also, when you pair the lyrics with the song and you can actually understand what he's saying, even though some of the meaning and poetry in his songwriting might be lost in translation, it still reads beautifully.
돌아가지 않을 것 같은 기대를 하게 돼요. 우린 손을 잡고 이 작은 수조 속에서
And this is another reason why I really like I Often Stammer. Yoon's songwriting is so incredibly beautiful but tragic in its imagery, and that is a constant throughout this album and every THORNAPPLE project. His lyrics are incredibly poetic, and as much as it sounds pretentious, are very profound. There is so much you can analyze and pick apart in his songwriting, especially on their sophomore album Strange Weather, which to me is kind of his and THORNAPPLE's magnum opus, not only musically but lyrically. Now, another song that features really interesting and out of this world songwriting is the last track on the album Cicadas Cry Even When It Rains. And yeah, this song takes you on a journey, and it paints an almost fairy tale like story of dark beasts and dancing in the rain. For example, the lyrics
벌거벗은 몸을 깊숙이 묻고 이제 낭저째 남문점을 졌나 모두가 남겨놓은 껍질을 삼켜 내게만 계속되는 8월의 현상 이른 내 주위에 가장 높은 탑
The line "let's go at the early 4th hour" suggests a sense of new beginnings, as 4 a.m. is very commonly considered to be pre-dawn, a moment of stillness and anticipation before the new day. Or the line "swallowing the husks left behind by everyone," which could symbolize having to deal with the consequences of actions, emotions, and past experiences left behind by others onto people. And that idea is only reinforced by the use of the word husk, which are the outer shells of something that are shed and left behind. Honestly, people, I could go on and on, but I'm going to save this in-depth analysis for the next part of this THORNAPPLE review series, where I talk about Strange Weather, which will be a lot longer, go way more in depth, and be incredibly hard to edit. Please, pray for future me. Either way, enough talking about Yoon's songwriting. To finish it off, let's talk a little bit more about the actual sound of the music, which is the most important part. As I said before, compared to the rest of the discography, this is THORNAPPLE at their most simplistic, which means songs are slightly more repetitive, less progressive, and a little one-note at times, which, while it does make for a less musically interesting project, it also means the songs are a lot more digestible and catchy. Tracks like Red Peter and Plankton are perfect examples of this.
되었던 계절 세 번째 달에 쓰여진 노래
There are no crazy switch-ups, tons of layered instrumentation, or complex riffs. The songs are very steady and consistent with pretty melodies, and honestly, while that's not a bad thing and I actually really enjoy every track on here, I do find it less entertaining compared to the much more complex and in-your-face style that THORNAPPLE would cultivate only a couple years after the release of this project. Also, this is the only album throughout their entire discography that has a fully instrumental song, let alone two. The opening track, Bloom, creates this extremely eerie soundscape with these distorted guitars that are soaked in reverb, and these creepy industrial sound effects that sound like scraping metal. And halfway through the track, this bright synth comes in that I can only describe as ghostly. The 6-track Cyanosis, which is really fun and up-tempo, and features this really bright synth pad that loops for the majority of the track. Also, similarly to Bloom, it kind of comes out of nowhere and doesn't really fit in with the rest of the album. But honestly, I don't really mind. Bloom is a nice opener and Cyanosis is just a fun little track. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. Overall, this is a project that, while quite amateurish and at times slightly messy due to THORNAPPLE still trying to find their sound, it's still pretty awesome and has tons of really great moments throughout its 43-minute runtime, and I would highly recommend checking it out for yourself. Also, thank you guys so much for the support on my last video, which currently stands at a whopping 1,700 views and 143 likes as I'm scripting this. It honestly means the world that you guys enjoy the content I put out, and it's super encouraging to see some of the really positive comments you guys left me about the video and how much you loved it. But yeah, either way, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share the video with anyone who might be interested, and get ready for the next video of this series because it is going to be a long one, and low-key, I think, kind of my best yet. Peace out.